there is a battle for the concept of money.
The group of emerging economies known as BRICS makes up more than 40% of the world's population and a quarter of the global economy, which aims to challenge a world order seen to be dominated by the US and its Western allies.
A new money is being created, a new world reserve currency that's meant to challenge the current world order. Now, this is a result of something called the BRICS Alliance, which is a team of 5 countries. And let me just give you some statistics of how powerful they're now becoming. By the end of 2023, they're estimated to control 25% of all the exported goods, which is about 29% of the world's GDP. Remember, that's the thing that measures how much stuff the world will make in a single year. They will also produce 43% of the world's oil, and they'll represent 46% of the world's population. And all of that is going to happen at the end of this year. And here's exactly what that means. The BRICS countries have overtaken the G7 countries already by something called purchasing power parity, which looks at living standards. It's measured that they'll also have about 50% of all the working people in the world, which altogether sit on about a quarter of the Earth's land area. And they're getting much, much bigger.
This year's chair, South Africa, says over 40 countries have expressed interest in joining. Oil heavyweight Saudi Arabia has the backing of Russia and Brazil. And Argentina says it has China's support.
Over 40 countries have already applied to join the BRICS, and starting next year in 2024, they're going to welcome 6 new countries to their list, including Saudi Arabia, Iran, Ethiopia, Egypt, Argentina, and the United Arab Emirates. So now the oil giants are joining BRICS, and their new money is rumored to be going back to the gold standard. And all of this is meant to challenge US, Western dominance, start the de-dollarization of the world. And that's already starting to happen because the central bank's share of dollar reserves is at a 20-year low of 58%. Even the head of marketing research at JP Morgan just recently said the importance of the dollar has declined significantly from 2014 to 2022, which leaves us with a lot of questions like, who are these countries? Why are they challenging the dollar? And what's wrong with the dollar to begin with? And if they're successful, will that lead to Ray Dalio's prediction coming true? That all world reserve currencies will inevitably come to an end. This is arguably one of the most important things that's happening on the global stage of politics, investing, and economics. And in today's video, I want to break down and explain exactly what's going on and how this could potentially affect us. So let's get into it. Hi, my name is Andre Jick. Hope you're doing well. Come for the finance and stay for the BRICS. Now, I want to apologize ahead of time and tell you that I'm not a historian, I'm not an economist. This is just me piecing together a very complicated story and trying to explain this to you. But if I make any mistakes, please feel free to correct me in the comment section. But let's start off by answering that first question of who...
Can't stop when things blow up. This is the best movie in the world. Expendables, definitely rated R.
Let's start off by answering that first question of who these countries are.
Jim O'Neill was an economist at the Goldman Sachs. He made an observation about the developing world. He pointed out how high the growth rates were in Brazil, Russia, India, and China.
Now, at that moment in history, those countries were called the rising stars because their economies were growing really, really fast. But they didn't actually come together until, fast forward 8 years later, 2009, the global recession.
The global financial crisis really made members of the emerging market, members of the global south, started to question the relevance and the trustworthiness of the US-led global financial system.
It was that recession that made everyone question how trustworthy the US global financial system was, and that's what led to the inaugural or the first official meeting of the BRIC countries that took place in Russia in 2009. And then 1 year later, South Africa joined the team, and that's where you get BRICS that you hear about today. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But they're also growing really fast. Next year, they're expected to more than double in size because they're adding 6 new countries to their team. So the second question is, why are they doing this and why are they challenging the dollar if the dollar is doing really well? In fact, if you look at the Dixie Index, you could see the dollar is getting stronger and it's going up, so why are they challenging it? The answer is insanely complicated, but you clicked on this video, so here it goes. So the current world order, as we know it to be today, in other words, why the world is the way that it is, was hugely created after World War II, where it pretty much stayed the same up until this moment in history where it's now changing. Now, back in 1944, there was the creation of something called the Bretton Woods Agreement. That's when 44 countries got together and they signed an agreement that put the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. The reason the US was picked for that, by the way, is because it was pretty much the only standing superpower left at that point, so it was the default choice. Now, a year later, in 1945, President Franklin Roosevelt set up a secret wartime meeting that would pretty much change the course of human history forever. Now, very little records were actually kept from that meeting, but Roosevelt promised the King of Saudi Arabia protection in exchange for the US to have the exclusive right to develop oil from Saudi Arabia. Now, the petrodollar gave the US three huge advantages, or superpowers. Number one, stability for trade, because every country needs a common money that they all trust. Number two, it made the US a superpower of investing. Assets like treasury bonds, real estate, and stocks, which is why, if you look at data over the last years, people made a ton of money investing into the US as compared to any other country's assets in the world. And number three, it created this link between energy and dollars that made the US and the West so powerful. Because as long as the world needs energy, which it does, or it wants to make money by investing, the world needs to use dollars. But here's where the real superpower comes in that really pushed these countries to come together and create their own alliance. Because we're taught in school that printing money is really bad because it leads to inflation. But that's less true if you're a world reserve currency and if you can do it right. Picture this. You're a country that's in a lot of debt and you need to pay for bridges, roads, education, and retirement. But if you try to print more money to solve all that, you'll just make the problem worse because the price of stuff will go way up, the middle class will get upset with you, and you'll get voted out of power, or even worse. But if you're the world's reserve currency and the world needs your money, then your country gets a special little button that when you press it, you can export your dollars and inflation goes away. But that also means if that country's irresponsible with how much they print, or if there's a recession, it could affect the entire world. That's partially why when you look at the world today, inflation just hit a peak in places like the UK, Italy, and Germany. Some inflation rates around the world have reached multiple digits, while US inflation is trending lower. The theory is that if the US uses its printer to spend money here at home to fix things, that people who don't understand the concept of inflation, which is the majority of people, would create a spending problem. Because you can't just give money to one kid without giving it to the other. You can't pay to fix your leg without first fixing your arm. But you can't fix your arm without fixing your hand, and if you fix your hand, you gotta fix your brain first. And on this goes. Before you know it, you get inflation, higher food and gas, higher rent prices, and that translates to the middle class feeling all that pain. Which is bad for who? It's bad for the politicians and bad for those in power. So the theory is this is exactly why the US prioritizes spending money to fix other countries' problems first, because it creates stronger foreign policy, creates allies, which helps with global interest, it helps lower inflation, and hopefully it does some good around the world too, but a lot of it has to do with creating the need and the use of dollars. The point is this though, those three superpowers given to the US, stability for trade, an investment powerhouse, and the ability to trade money for energy has given the US a lot of power and a lot of say over what other countries can and cannot do. That's why some of them have bonded together to create their own alliance and their own version of money. Now here's a question. If you're a country, where do you go to borrow money from? Now, sure, you could print your own money, but we already know what that leads to. Inflation, higher prices, you get replaced, not a good idea. The answer is, if you're a country and you want to borrow money, you go to the World Bank or the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Think of this as one big world piggy bank that all the countries in the world contribute to, and anytime a developing country wants to borrow money to build out infrastructure, they could do that. They could borrow a couple $2 billion in exchange for a reasonable interest rate that could be maybe even lower if that country behaves and does what's in the best interest of those in power. Power, which not everyone agrees, is divided fairly. The BRICS countries